Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our underscore customer success core virtual event. We appreciate everyone's flexibility in joining us remotely. Ideally, we'd be connecting in person. Obviously, a lot going on, but still plenty to talk about. And you might be looking forward to connecting with folks after being cooped up at home the last few days. So first and foremost, we hope everyone's staying safe and staying out there working remote with family and pets running around. So grab a beverage, it's 5 o'clock, and join us for what should be a fun and informative night. So before we get started, my name is Jay Wilson, and I head up the Customer Success Manager team at Buildium, which is a property management software company located in downtown Boston. And along with Bryce DelGrande, who will be leading a Q&A later on tonight, I've recently partnered with Underscore VC as a Customer Success Fellow. And what that means and the goal of what we're looking to do is to create a venue where customer success professionals can make connections and have conversations that get to the heart of the challenges we're all working through every day, including some of the ones we're going through now. So these types of events, the ones like tonight where we bring together the broader customer success community, are one way to do that. Again, hopefully in person in the not too distant future. And we also want to look for ways to connect folks that are in similar roles. So that might be over breakfast or drinks. So VPs to VPs or managers and directors with each other to talk about their daily grind. Additionally, we know that real change and real ideas can spark when conversations continue following these events and relationships start. So we'll also be growing a Slack group and experimenting with ideas to foster one-on-one meetups to allow CS professionals to dive deeper into how other companies are doing things and meet up in office or over coffee. So Bryce and I are extremely excited to be partnering with Underscore VC on this initiative. And for those of you that are just getting to know Underscore is a Boston-based VC firm that surrounds the entrepreneurs they back with a community of experienced professionals. And this community is what's called Underscore's core. And the core is a network of hundreds of Boston's brightest and proven business builders. So for us, what better organization to partner with than one that believes so deeply that success is built through a community and collaboration. So with that, I'd like to pass it to Michael Scott, a co-founder and partner at Underscore, who will get our night underway.
Thanks, Jay. It's really fun to think that actually this customer success core group got going now about 4 years ago with none other than your CEO, Chris Litzter.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Thank you for taking up the reins now of bringing this to the next generation and championing the customer success core with us here.
Of course.
So, my job this evening is a very easy one, actually. It's to introduce Jeff, who has been working for the last several weeks, actually, with us to try to develop what he feels is an important shift in the customer success perspective. And so let me give you 2 minutes background on Jeff, and then he'll give you the background on why he's thinking about this and where this came from. So first of all, Jeff is a very accomplished exec. He's been at Keenan, eDocs, and then when I recruited Demandware, he was one of the first people to start building our sales organization. At a time, we basically had zero revenue. So very few people have done what he did, which is then to build it into a multi-$100 million revenue business that we then took public. And it was a pleasure to watch him on the board, both develop the organization as well as obviously lead the team to becoming a very successful public business in its own right. What he did beyond that, which was very important, was he harmonized the business around a business model of customer success. And it's easy to talk about that, but what he achieved was, frankly, creating partnerships with brands like L'Oreal, LVMH, Adidas, Patagonia, New Balance, many others that would be considered to be some of the best retailers and best brands in the world. And how he did that was to make sure that every day he got up, he thought about how can he make their business more successful. And the business model that we had actually aligned that way so that we only took revenue when they were getting increases in their GMV. And that attracted the attention in the end of Salesforce because they looked at it and said, hey, we're a SaaS business. This is one of the biggest areas of growth in commerce, and ultimately came to acquire the company where Jeff then took the CEO role and ran the business through not just a few hundred million in revenue, but ultimately $20 billion of gross merchandise value, creating a $1 billion revenue business within Salesforce, with literally a couple of 100 million unique consumers on the platform. So it's a fantastic journey to listen to, and I'm happy, Jeff, that you've chosen to share with us the learnings from that, and also how we can shift our perspective for the next generation of customer success. So Jeff, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate the very, very kind words. Really do appreciate that. And hello to everybody. Thank you for joining. And I am so sorry we can't be in person. I was really looking forward to it personally. But hopefully we'll have a chance to do that before too long. Be able to eliminate some of that social distance between us, and once we're through all this. But in the meantime, I hope you're all safe at home, safe and sound with your families, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon. I hope this is helpful to you and what's your appetite vis-a-vis the topic of customer success. But now, before I get started, I just want to take a moment to discuss the origin of this presentation and build a little bit on what Michael was saying. And as he mentioned, this work out of my experience as COO of Demandware along that journey, and ultimately as CEO of the commerce business at Salesforce. And that was a long journey. It was about a 14-year journey for me, and kind of interesting perspective in the sense of starting with a pre-revenue business and starting to wrestle with what customer success meant in this modern day, up through, of course, a very large public company. And all along the way, we were learning and solving on this topic. And by no means have we figured it all out. So there's a lot of learning there in front of us. But it was an amazing, wonderful experience. Also incredibly humbling at times. And in particular, we learned a lot about customer success, and we made a ton of mistakes at every step of the journey. And ironically, in the early days, I think back on this, I was confiding with a colleague the other day, we were chatting about it. We were super confident. We really thought we were progressive. We kind of got customer success. In fact, we chose a business model aligned to the customer's online revenue, a percent, in the sense we earn money as a percent of revenue early on. And pretty early, in the first couple of years, we established a customer success function. Now, we didn't actually call it that then, but that's fundamentally what it was doing. And yet, as we grew, problems emerged, and they emerged with the customer in the sense of them struggling to get to the objective that drove the project in the first place. And also within our organization, we started to get friction between different parts of the organization in terms of aligning around the customer. So in a nutshell, that was the school of hard knocks that started me and us down this path of thinking about what's the right new operational model for customer success. And so to start, let's just talk about what's going on in the world today. And I don't think it's controversial, but I think we'd all agree that the combination of the internet as a platform, coupled with mobility technology and with apps, has driven a real profound disruption in virtually every aspect of our life. How we shop, how we travel, how we entertain ourselves, how we communicate. And this has deeply transformed the economy, and it happened really in the blink of an eye so quickly. In retail, for example, since its founding in 1994, we've seen Amazon capture 40% of all US online sales last holiday season. And they've now got a market cap 3 times the biggest retailer in the world, which is Walmart. Just incredible. In transportation, Uber was founded just 10 years ago, and some of its peers, hard to believe. Yet in a recent survey, it was found that 75% of all travel receipts for corporate America are for app rides, versus about 22% for rental cars. That had been 50% just 5 years prior, and only 5% for taxis. So the world has been turned upside down in transportation in a very short time. That's cut across the economy. If we look at this B2B world that so many of us live in, the transformation has largely been characterized by a major shift from on-prem to cloud computing. And you can consider, just to put that in perspective, AWS, since it was launched in 2006, has created $500 billion in market value. At the same time, the previous gold standard, which was IBM, over that same period of time, has created only $3.5 billion in market value. So an incredible shift in value creation as a result. So I think we all get that. You're like, Jeff, get the point. Why does it matter? What's the point here? Well, I think we can identify two key implications of this on our business. The first is that our customer relationships have become much more continuous and connected versus these discontinuous transactional relationships we had previously. So in other words, we are now daily delivering service and touching our customers. And secondly, as a result, we've got the emergence of these new business models, namely subscription and utilization models, where we earn as we go. And because of these fundamental shifts, the old operational models are no longer sufficient. And I can tell you, at Demandware, as we were going through this, we searched high and low, from academia and the business press and our peer business community, and we found a real lack of models to fall back on to help us think about how we're going to organize our business to really maximize customer success, given all these large sweeping changes. So we began a long journey of developing our own, and that's a lot of what you'll see in this point of view I have here today. So let's step back and talk about what the world looked like beforehand to draw contrast. And previously, the model for a successful software business looked something like this. And I'm simplifying, of course, but this is basically how we saw it. It was a huge focus on the traditional marketing funnel, right? At the top of the funnel, building brand awareness and closing customers at the bottom of the funnel, and hopefully getting those repeat sales happening, that feedback loop that became more efficient. All of this connected to a post-sale process that was about getting the customer deployed, usually through a third party, so we get leverage and offload that responsibility. And then providing the customer a place to go for support if they had problems. So in other words, a highly proactive sales model connected to a much more disconnected, reactive support model. Kind of call us if you need us. I think that's really pretty close. So this model, I don't mean to be negative about it. It worked well for us in the day, and it fueled massive growth in kind of the first generation of enterprise technology, in systems integration services, call centers, help desk technology, and so forth. However, it is wholly inadequate for this modern customer experience we're talking about, given these changes I've outlined. So why? Well, the reason is this. The approach, this historical approach, ignores the customer. It ignores the customer journey, because this is what the customer journey looks like. It starts with a problem. Why did they buy your software in the first place? What were they trying to accomplish? And there is a long journey to be walked before the objective is realized, whatever the fruits of their ROI is that they sold the project internally for in the first place. So the work really starts with the sale, and it's not successful until the objectives are fully realized. And we know the steps, right? Implementation, training and enablement of users, testing, various rollout processes as we go across business units and geographies, and all the while applying analytics to measure results, tuning, optimizing as we go to make that journey better. And the more effective and efficient we can make that journey, the happier and more benefit that will accrue to the customer, and ultimately to us in the form of subscription fees and lack of churn. So we want to bring that benefit forward. That's good for the customer, good for us. You can really think of, in fact, you think about under these steps of the customer journey here to the goal or the objective. Think about that as your march to LTV, and we want to keep the customer obviously from not opting out along that journey, churning, but in fact, you want to get them there quicker, and you want to bring that forward. So, there's been a lot of talk recently, topically, about flattening curves. Well, here's a place we want to fatten this curve. We want to bring it forward. So, in a nutshell, the very nature of our relationships with our customers has changed, and necessarily the ways in which we as businesses need to engage them. We've moved from selling a product, providing an experience or a business outcome. We've moved from perpetual licenses and money up front to pay-as-you-go models, from a focus on upselling and pushing that next upgrade, that next product, to generating success for the customer, and therefore, thereby creating a pull that they want more and need more so they can get more benefits sooner. and eliminating all the barriers to them doing that. And finally, we've gone from supporting the customer to living with the customer. So net, customers now have more choice and more access to information than ever before. So many vendors are out there offering to solve the problem. We have more price transparency than ever, and switching costs are going down every day. So it's a brave new world, new rules, new game, and those rules are customer rules. Convinced? I certainly am myself. So it's their game, and it's about their success, and we need to understand how they define winning and how we can best align to ensure that success. And that's what I'm going to talk about here in the rest of this presentation. But as a good entree for that, it begs the question, what is customer success? Because it is such the buzzword, so topical these days. I have people tell me, we've got customer success nailed, because customer success is our #1 value corporate-wise. See, look, it's on the chart there. And we have a customer success team, so we feel like we got it nailed. Well, I can tell you, great start, but there is a lot more to it. I think you all know that. So let me offer this definition, and it really comes down to 2 key words. One is objectives, being the customer fully realizing their objectives and as fully and as quickly as possible. And secondly, that the experience in doing so is pleasant, right? It's no good to have the customer meet the objective, and it's been a complete death march through the project and the implementation to get there, and everybody's agitated, right? So it's really the combination of those things, solving the problem, getting to the benefit, and doing that in a really elegant way. So where do we go from here? How do we attack this opportunity? And at the bottom line, it comes down to this: easier to say than to do, but aligning the entire company around the customer's path to success or their objectives, and not like we often do around our internal business metrics. We can no longer offer or just create a customer success team and view that as a recipe for success. It really needs to permeate every department, every aspect of our business. So the approach we took really could be summarized around the following kind of key steps. There's obviously a lot more detail to dig into these areas. We can do it at a later time, but the first is around design. And this means stepping back and charting the path for the customer to the objective. So how does the customer define success? And what things need to happen for them to achieve it? Not just looking at our product, but in the fullness of that whole supply chain. What does it mean? Secondly, operationalizing, so critically reorienting how we align our company in priorities to maximize customer success first versus, again, our business metrics, which we so often do. And we do that through a customer-centric operational model. I'll share a framework here in a moment. Thirdly, get representation for the customer, and doing this vis-a-vis a real customer success function aligned with the customer and their objectives. I'll get into that. And then all of that connected to the right monetization model, meaning your business model, and having that aligned to the best proxy for success for the customer, eliminating the friction. So let's briefly talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. In charting the path to the customer's objectives, there's really 3 key questions to be addressed, in my view. The first is, what are the customer's objectives? What are they looking to do when they purchase your product? Is it about revenue growth, cost savings, margin improvement, cash management, et cetera? What is it? And then secondly, importantly, what are the metrics they will use to measure this at the end of the day? And we don't want 10 or 20 or 30 metrics. We really want to get to those couple of metrics, maybe 3, 2, that allow us to really get the right signal attenuation to what's important to the customer. And then thirdly, we need to identify what work needs to be done in order for the objectives to be realized, because this is where stuff gets real, and there's a lot to be done. So moving to a customer-centric operational model is where this becomes concrete and actionable to the company. It's really the heavy lifting. I can tell you, we've spent a lot of effort internally at Demandware over the years and later at Salesforce to make this happen and keep reinforcing it and getting the company to walk the walk. So to draw a contrast to a customer-centric organization, let's consider for a moment the traditional operational model, very similar to what we had certainly at Demandware, Salesforce. Maybe many of you are organized this way, I suspect so. looks kind of like this. We're organized around corporate goals on things like bookings, ARR growth, margin, cash, and so forth. And then these goals matriculate down to our internal supply chain, to our departments. It's the specific departmental responsibilities and metrics that they need to employ. So things like billability and margin for the services team, maybe leads and bookings for sales and marketing, and so on. R&D being focused on bug fixing, and trying to get that next feature out ASAP in order to stay ahead of the market and be able to win the market. And don't get me wrong, all these things are important, and this model have worked really well for us for a long, long time. However, one big thing is missing here, and that is the customer. Where is the customer in all of this? I mean, they're touched on here and there, but it is not, I think you'd agree, centered on the customer. So ultimately, we stepped back as Demandware and decided to center our entire operational model on the customer. And this took a lot of work, and there was a lot of discussion. And sort of at the end of that, we decided that the entire customer, we'll call it customer lifecycle, customer journey, could be represented across these 4 phases. Select, so the process the customer needs to go through to actually make the decision to purchase, and all the things they need to think about there. Activate, which is actually to get them onto the platform, onboarding, implementation. To the scale process, which is really about rolling out that value proposition across the entire business and realizing the planned value. And then we have an innovation phase, which is about, okay, great, we're now on track, we've rolled out completely, we're realizing the benefit, but where do we go from here? Because of course the work does not stop for the customer upon hitting that initial ROI. Then you have continuous pressures to improve the business and grow, and we need to be there at every step of the journey. So everything we did as a company could be reframed within one of these phases of the customer journey, and indeed the work of every individual, every sales rep, every engineer, every services professional was connected to these phases. So first, we unpacked the work that needed to be done by the customer in each of these phases, each of these 4 phases. And I've shown you some here. We identified the metrics most important to the customer at each phase, in particular related to their achievement of the ultimate objectives. And then we assigned work to each department of the company for each phase related to improving these customer metrics. These customer metrics at each phase that were targeted towards the customer realizing that business benefit at the end. And that journey, as you know, particularly in the B2B world, can be a year or longer, multiple years potentially, till that ROI is actually realized. And we were comfortable, given our business model, that if we could improve these metrics and maximize the success of the customer in the way they saw it, that was going to positively impact our business metrics as well. Now, this isn't to say we didn't have business metrics along the way, because we certainly did, but they were subservient to the customer experience and delivering on the value anticipated. So, of course, this kind of work can quickly become a paper tiger. So the hard part is really operationalizing it. And within a company, certainly for us at Demandware, when we started this, that meant changing everything, changing priorities, and then changing the language of the company, and then changing the core processes. I mean, literally everything. So to accomplish this, we created an operational dashboard for the company overall in terms of the core metrics and how we looked at these 4 phases of the customer journey. We also created an operational dashboard for each of the 4 phases that allowed us to coordinate and hold ourselves accountable monthly and quarterly to progress in improving the outcome for the customer each step of the way. So I'll briefly step through this template. Objectives, I think, are clear, talking about the outcomes that we need to achieve for the customer overall and at every step of the journey. Metrics are about the key measures around how the customer defines success and progress against those outcomes. Owner identifies the primary owner of the phase within the company. I think that's important. Even though every department will have a role to play, having a quarterback at every phase is important. And the methods, this terminology we use for the work that the company is doing day to day, quarter to quarter to get this done. Now, ultimately, the work every person in the company is doing is connected to one of these phases, and you can connect it ultimately to one of these top line metrics. In the end, if you're doing this right. Importantly, each phase is inherently cross-departmental, so departments have shared goals aligned to the customer each step of the way. And I can tell you, making this shift away from silos where every department was trying to optimize their metrics. For example, the services team trying to optimize billability and services margin, well, that could run cross purposes to what was best for the customer that was already out there in the field live and struggling with the product, or that customer in a sales phase. And so we got people working together around what mattered for the customer much more fluidly. And these dashboards ultimately became the language of the company. It was how we measured progress and we drove accountability. In fact, that carries forward to Salesforce as well. 50,000 person company runs itself with a cadence very much like this. So at company meetings now, we're no longer standing up with the traditional thing. Each department stands up and describes how they're progressing. How's sales doing? How's marketing doing? How is product doing? And so forth. Instead, we stood up and we talked about how the company was doing against that phase. How are we doing in the select phase? How are we doing in activation? How are we moving the metrics? How are the projects that we're investing in to move those metrics? How are those doing? Are we making the intended improvements? So let's look here briefly at an example from Demandware, just to frame it a little bit. This is a simplification of a dashboard that we would use. Note that initially, we had to focus on the usual metrics around company things like bookings and billability and ARR growth. But as we deployed this SASE model, we reframed the business around the customer in these 4 phases. As you see in the example now, the select phase was focused on key customer metrics like total cost of ownership. Activation was about time and cost to deploy, things the customer really cared about at that point. Scale was about GMV growth, or the customer's online sales growth. And innovation was about feature adoption and incremental GMV growth, so improvements in the metrics that drove revenue growth online for these customers, and so on. Then we assigned departmental actions to be completed quarter by quarter to improve these metrics, again, what we call methods. For example, since scale was all about getting online revenue growth up, we learned that a key impediment to that was customers employing e-commerce best practices. Forget about their use of our platform, just common best practices. Not every company was executing flawlessly. And we also found that the use of our tools to optimize site experience was sort of underutilized. So as a result, we invested heavily in launch boot camps to propagate best practice amongst our customer base. And we also invested heavily in analytics and multivariate testing and other tools to help the customer optimize their use of our tools. We invested in walk-me's in the product to lead the customer to best practice and improvement of the result they were getting. So these are just a few examples. I hope the concreteness of them gives you a sense of the sort of things you can do here when you reframe about what's most important, which is the customer. And like I tell you, in the end, they generally helped us to improve the metrics. And over the years, we did fantastically well. We had on a units basis, near 99% customer retention, some very small churn. On a dollar basis, we were between 110 to 120%, so effectively kind of negative margin. So we did really well here, and we think it was because we had our eye on the ball at every step of that journey. So moving on from the dashboards, a third important step is to establish a customer success function. I assume most of you have done this already. It's very much in fashion today, which is great. But a few things to say about that. And first of all, customer success is not a department. It is work of the entire company, every department. We used to say everybody's in sales and software. Well, now everybody is in customer success, and I really mean that. Every department, every person has a role to play in that. However, it's important to designate one department to serve as the advocate, or let's say kind of the focusing lens within the company for the customer experience, to represent them within the company actively across this 4-phase experience. That function should report directly to the CEO, and its comp should be aligned fully to the customer success metrics. So the things that matter to the customer. If the customer is winning, that team is winning. If the customer's not, they're not. And by the way, same thing goes for the leadership, and I think the whole executive team, if not the company, has to be reframed in that way. That gets everybody thinking about what is really important, which is the customer. At Demandware, that was GMV growth or online revenue growth for the customer. That was our penultimate metric. And Now, obviously, this customer success organization should be tightly connected to the customer. And I mean this very literally, like I mean in the field, living with the customer, identifying and propagating best practice across the customer base, identifying friction points in the customer experience, and how the company or the product can be improved. I can tell you in Demandware, an example of this is having our product experts sitting in the field in the offices of the merchants that were running those e-commerce sites with our tools to understand how they used our tools, how they did their job. And I can tell you, when we started doing that, we learned a lot. We thought we understood it. I'll tell you, we really did. We learned a ton. And this insight came back to the company and drove R&D priorities and alignment of resources. So finally, if we've done all this work, we've understood the path to the customer achieving their objectives, we've aligned our company around that path, and we've got this customer success-oriented operational cadence. We have a customer success team. We can still have friction if our business model is not aligned to the customer. Now, in a classic software company, the interests of the customer and those of the company diverge post-sale. As an example, consider a company like Oracle, which is a great company, and they care deeply about their customers, make no mistake about it. However, they're also, at the same time, under tremendous pressure each quarter to deliver growth. That means A, winning new customers, and B, selling new products to the existing customers, upselling them. And any effort on helping the existing customers to get more value out of what they've already bought is an expense item, and it negatively impacts margins and growth. It drags things down. So despite all best intentions, that makes it very hard for companies to continue to do what's right for the customer. So get that business model right. Now, that's true unless our business model captures value in concert with the customer. And there are many potential success-oriented models, as I mentioned. At Demandware, that was a percent of revenue model, whereby we earned as a percent of the customer's online growth, that key metric. And just to reframe the thinking, so you can imagine around the time I stepped down, we had about $20 billion in online sales running through the platform annually, and that number is actually growing significantly every year. Well, I can tell you, going into an operational year, if I had X amount of budget to spend in R&D and aligning the company, the most valuable thing I could do for my company was to make my existing customers more efficient, not selling new customers, right? So if I could make each customer just 1% more effective against that $20 billion in annual GMV running through it, that was going to drive far more bottom line value to the company than any exceptional sales quarter. So there's a stark example that it can be much easier to stay aligned with the customer and focus on the right things if you've got the right model. And you need to think about what's appropriate for you. I've given some examples here, depending on your industry and how your customer is sort of focused. There can be a lot of different formulas to find the best proxy to what matters for the customer, because that's where value is understood and can be best captured. So in summary, the world has changed fundamentally. I hope you agree on that. And as a result, we need to evolve our companies and our operational models in response. And this means, in particular, mobilizing our companies with a central focus on providing success for the customer. We can and should measure our internal business metrics, but this should be done within the context of a plan that maximizes the customer's outcome. If it's the reverse, so we start with business metrics on top, and within those we'll allocate money to some success activities, we risk missing the mark and under-realizing value and ultimately disappointing the customer. So the good news is we know this works, and you don't need to take just my word for it. There are so many great companies out there that are doing this. Just take, for example, Amazon and Salesforce are two great examples of companies that have created enormous market value by being really maniacal about being centered on the customer and making them successful as well. So listen, today I've shared a model for thinking about how to employ this at your company, but it's not the only way, of course. As long as you get your entire company mobilized around improving every aspect of the customer's journey to their objectives, you are on the right path. So good luck to all of you. And thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Fun listening to you, and it's been fun watching you build this presentation, and of course, for the many years, actually building the business that went behind it. So a couple of questions that I think will help get us ready for the panel. And that is, first of all, obviously this is something that you applied from sort of zero through $1 billion in revenue. So you've seen it go from nothing to scale. Where does the startup begin? Like if you were giving somebody the first concrete step they should take, orienting themselves to their customer's experience, where should they start?
Yeah, well, great question, Michael. And, as I mentioned at the onset, the learning started very early in the Demandware days, but we were still, we were a pre-revenue startup. And the evolution of learning evolved the whole way as we got larger. But I think that all these things that I talked about today are very important, even in the startup area. But as a startup in particular, the key point I would make is this, that the most important first step is to get very tight with your customer. And, step one in the action plan I mentioned, right? Map out their customer journey, understand the metrics, understand how you're going to facilitate that journey. That means you understand everything about their objectives, their pain points, their use cases. If you're pre-product, this can be done in PMR work, right? We can fall back on that. If we're early product, we can do proof of concepts and pilots, or we get to the point where we can have beta customers. If we have a functioning product that we can sit with, that are aligned with us spiritually in solving the problem, and we sit with them and we learn from them. But just one key point here is that it's critical that in doing this, we be centered on the resolution of the whole problem for the customer, not just that portion of the problem we solve with our product. You got to really think about how we wire that whole supply chain. So if there are third-party technologies that need to be taken into account, or services partners, or enablement or training that has to happen with the customer, we need to wire all those components such that the customer can get the value sooner. And in my view, this is where many startups, Michael, to your question, miss the trail. We get too obsessed and too close to our product and our feature capabilities, and we're under pressures with our boards and our investors, and so we obsess about basic business metrics like bookings and cash management. But get close to the customer.
Yep. I think that's very well said, Jeff. Actually, the important takeaway I want to make sure that startups do to really hear from Jeff is, your product is very rarely more than a piece of the overall solution that meets the customer's objectives. And you've got to understand how you fit and be respectful of all of the other, might be vendors or services or providers, et cetera, that participate in that, and help the customers be successful with all of them.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to ask more questions, but I actually want to turn over the panel sooner rather than later so they can get a chance to participate here. And I'm going to start by introducing Renee. Renee Bochman currently runs customer engagement at Salsify. So I've been lucky enough to work with Renee twice now, once at Acquia and now again at Salsify. And I can tell you she's incredibly passionate about taking the customer perspective and will be a great champion for your messages, but also I'm sure will bring some thoughts to life here. And then the second of our customer success fellows, this is Bryce, who runs customer success alongside Jay with our core community. He's the manager of customer success at Shoobx, and he's helping them as a platform bring customer success as part of the ways in which they help startups. So I'll turn it over to you guys, and thank you again, Jeff. We'll speak at the end.
Thanks, Michael. I believe Renee is on mute. You want to clear that up really quick? Perfect.
Sorry about that.
So I figured a good place for us to start would be with the massive virus-shaped elephant in the room, talking about COVID-19. As you're in a leadership role in a startup organization right now, we've talked a lot about metrics, we've talked a lot about organization. How are you thinking about all this amidst all the current chaos?
I think it's an interesting place to be, because for customer success, you kind of have to stay in front of your customers' needs. If you develop a model and kind of try to stay in that model, regardless of how the economy or how the customer profile or that piece works. And I think COVID's a perfect example of this. Now we have to be even more relevant to answering our customers' problems and what will really help them. So it's kind of an accelerated version of how do you make sure that your customer life cycle is matching what your customer is going through right now. So as our customers are suddenly having to work from home, or suddenly having supply chain issues, or suddenly having new challenges that are really impacting their businesses, how do we turn our focus into making sure our customer journey meets them where they are? And then, of course, there's also the other piece of it of how do we make sure that we're really having the outcomes and the metrics to ensure the business is driving in the right direction, and that the customer team is meeting the outcomes for our business that we need it to be.
Yeah,
Jeff?
I think that's some great perspective.
I'm going to move so I'm not like in the sunlight. The shade of day has changed. So
that's perfectly fine. To piggyback off that, we do have, and how you get buy-in from the executive team. Jeff, you want to share some thoughts around what that looks like, and how do you get behind those metrics? How do you define those metrics? I think that would be great.
Yeah, and you cut out just a little bit here. Okay, so the question is around how do you get buy-in from the executives and the leadership to move to a model like this? Yeah, great question. And I think it comes back to the voice of the customer speaks loudly, right? So you can make all the persuasive arguments in the world that you want with your leadership and your company internally, but nothing will have more impact than the customer speaking directly to everybody. So I would say look for opportunities for the company to hear directly from the customers. And there's a variety of ways to do this. And this means not only the senior leadership, but other key departments, engineering, support, marketing. Marketing tends to be pretty close to the customer frequently. But particularly those that tend to be a step or two removed from the customer. Sometimes leadership, not all leadership is out in the field every day, dealing with the realities of implementations and data execution. So getting them close to that, having them sit with the customer and learn from them directly, I'll tell you, makes a big impact. And I think you'll start to find allies in actually getting that solved.
That's great. And maybe to position that then towards Renee, as we're thinking about getting closer to our customers and really understanding what their objectives are, how are you putting practice into place to track those objectives, to understand those objectives, to really drive this new model of thinking?
Yeah, we've kind of had to rethink it because you can tend to have metrics that seem easy, kind of like customer sat, or you can do CRR, and some of those are lagging, some of those are very individual, but they don't really tell you if the customer is getting value and are they meeting the milestones that they need to do. So we're really looking at both our onboarding and post-onboarding program of kind of how do we align with the customers on their goals, and then have check-ins and scores and measurements, kind of how we're doing, both from their perspective and our perspective, and making sure we're doing it both at the basic level, that's not the right way, the user level, as well as the executive sponsor level, because a lot of times you can get a lot of good feedback at one level and be really missing the mark. So we're creating things like operational plans and goal documents to really drive towards alignment from the customer to the customer success team, and being able to kind of share that with the account team and make sure everybody understands where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish. So really trying to operationalize that. It can be challenging, different customers, different styles and mechanisms, but that's the beauty of having customer success.
And how have you traditionally presented those metrics or tracked them in a dialogue with your customers? What is the mutual language? What is the format of that?
We do a planning session kind of even before we start to work with delivery. So one of the things we've learned is that not everybody's clear on their outcomes of what they're going to consider success. Everybody gets really jazzed up about, hey, I bought this new thing and we're going to do this thing. And nobody's really clearly defined how would you say that the outcome of this has been successful, and what are the metrics that would be put in place? So we did that as part of the initial onboarding process, is really make sure that everybody's aligned against kind of these goals and metrics, and how are we going to track it going forward, and then shared documents or shared ways of kind of based on, technology limitations on companies and what they can do from that perspective, and being flexible with our customers on kind of what they need, both having the short-term goals, because sometimes you just need to get stuff done, and sometimes you need that longer-term goal, because if you focus only on the short-term goal, you never really make it to that long-term goal, and then it comes to renewal and everybody's like, didn't really get the value I want. So keeping those check-in points where you need them, making sure you're reviewing those metrics and outcomes that you were aiming for. And if something comes up, because I don't know, like a pandemic comes up, maybe you have to readjust what your goals are and what you need to accomplish for the business to be successful. So making sure you're staying in tune with that.
Yeah, the chaos of a pandemic, if that ever happens.
Yeah, for a hypothetical crazy scenario.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question here from the web. Rick Kenny asks to Jeff, along the journey at Demandware, you and the team evolved the CS organization from generalist early on to a specialist model later. Can you talk about how and when you decided to make those shifts and the trade-offs of making that change?
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned, there was a lot of organizational learning along this journey, and it was, you can imagine, as a startup in those early days, I mean, a lot of your money that you're raising from your investors is going to the things they really understand how to do today. Like, okay, we need to invest in product, we need to invest in a sales team, and so forth. And so getting buy-in organizationally that we're going to invest in this thing called customer success, which is, a cost center to start, sitting out there with a customer. It's going to scale with the number of customers we have at some level. Can be a tough sell, right? So figuring that out was kind of step one for us. But as we got out there with our generalist team, so that every account in our very early days was covered at some level by customer success teams doing some of the things that Renee was mentioning, we began to see opportunities. And the opportunities we began to see were around really propagating best practice, areas of expertise, whether they be technology or just business practice, that were not happening broadly in our customer base, and that we wanted to propagate. Or if one customer came up with a technique that really worked, trying to propagate the benefit of that across the customer, so that we were all kind of learning collectively as an organization. So ultimately, it became easier to justify the growth of this organization and the specialties around it, because we started to see, as a result of some of these efforts, improvements in how the customers were performing. Their conversion rates were improving, online revenue growth was improving. We were operating at multiples to the industry. Our average customer was operating and growing e-commerce revenue at multiples to the industry, we think in large part because of these things that we were doing. So that became the business argument internally for more investment in this area.
Great, thanks for that. We have another one in from Anne. Hi, I'm being asked to build out CS OKRs for a company that has less than 20 paying customers. What are some key things you would get started on at a new startup? Renee, maybe you want to start with that one, and then we can pass over to Jeff.
Yeah, it's really, actually, Lee, my boss and I have been talking about this a lot. It's really super easy to kind of get into the basic metrics, right? CRR, customer sat, kind of one of the things we've been doing at Salsify is really taking a look at what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve and what are the leading indicators of what those outcomes might be. So if you're trying to retain those customers or you're trying to grow the customers, but that's a big goal for a CS organization. So what do you think would actually move the needle on the customer experience based on what you know of the customer journey? If you don't know, it's time to start talking to even the 20. But from a company perspective, you probably have, you should have goals that you're trying to accomplish. So what are bigger than you want to be comfortable with goals that you think the CS organization can actually move the needle on? And then what are leading indicators around that? And then what are the initiatives that you can do to kind of push those forward? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And pulling right into another question here from Ross, which I think is relevant. One of the things that I think a lot of folks in the SaaS world are seeing as they're talking to those customers, especially early on, is the objection that, you know, we have so many SaaS platforms, I have to plug into all of these things. What do you say to get around that? How do you navigate those waters of multiple integrations with multiple different systems?
Well, I don't know. Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, this is exactly the point that I'm trying to make around wiring the customer journey to achieving their business goal or outcome beyond just your product, right? That to solve the business problem, usually, certainly in the enterprise, there's a legacy system environment you need to integrate with. There's probably third-party cloud technology out there. There may be, you know, services like you know, digital marketing expertise and other things like that that need to come to bear to solve the problem. And so this is what we're talking about, is really stepping back and thinking about how you're going to fill all those needs in a way that makes the economics and the delivery of that comfortable for the customer. So I think that's the challenge for us, right? And this is where we need to stay super close to the customer to help us, because we can go down a lot of rat holes here and build a lot of integrations that may not bring you value, right? And give you the leverage in the market. So staying close to the customer and with them prioritizing, you've got the right things done. But again, always being framed around the customer. You know, the question was asked a moment ago about CS OKRs, right? And I guess I would just, you know, I may be a broken record on this, but I'm very passionate about it. That those OKRs cannot be the traditional things of, okay, what's my services margin? What's my billability rate, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, those are things out there and you got to manage those, don't get me wrong. But that has nothing to do with the customer. The customer could care less about those things. What they care about is solving their problem. That means getting the integrations done, getting their people trained, getting it rolled out. And so that's the opportunity for us, really.
And I think you also, you talked about this, and I appreciate this very much. It's so easy to get sucked into your view of the customer. So if you think about like an adoption is a word that we use all the time. We want customers to adopt the platform. But what does that mean to a customer? Like, where's the value in them adopting? What does adoption mean to them? And it's so tricky and slippery to kind of get lost in the language of like, oh, onboarding, or oh, post onboarding, or oh, now we're in expansion period. But that is not a customer view, and that is not a customer journey. So back to your point of staying super close to understanding what your customer is trying to do, because if you're just a tool, I think at one point Salsify had a swear jar if anybody called it a tool kind of thing. But if you don't understand the real value,
I might have cut out there for a second.
Yeah, if you don't understand the value of the tool, the service that you're providing to your customers, you know, your product marketing team, and you need to sit down and kind of really understand that and make sure your customer experience is driving that as well. Because customers will drive you ragged wanting all the features to flip this way and flip that way. But if it doesn't bring the value at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
And Jeff, you talked about voice of the customer programs as a way to get in tune with how those customers are thinking about this, what their values are, what they need. Can you talk about what implementing a voice of the customer program would look like, and maybe some of the things that you've seen in successful programs?
Yeah, sure, certainly, great, great. And Renee was talking about sort of the ideal scenario of really sitting with your customers and sort of day-to-day talking with them and learning from them and so forth, and having sort of action plans and sort of joint planning and so forth, which I think is fantastic. And we certainly did that with as much as possible with all our enterprise customers. But of course, often, depending on your business, you don't have the luxury of doing that with all your customers, right? And so how do you stay in tune with them all? So I'd say a couple things. First is, voice of customer needs an owner internally. It can't be sort of everybody's job. Often it lives in marketing, which I think sometimes it can get a little off the rail, to be honest, because it gets a little bit too focused into being a marketing tool. It's about showcasing customer success stories so we can impress the market and sell more, rather than really learning how we get better. Like you want the bad news, right? So there's there's a lot of different ways to go at it. I'll put a couple things out there that we've used with some success. First is, of course, surveys, right? And you need a baseline. And there's a lot of ways to structure this. I can't cover it, right now in terms of some of the things we were doing, but on a regular basis, quarterly or whatever it is, maybe somehow based on the cadence of the customer using your product, getting a consistent baseline around which you gauge how well the customer is getting the benefit, how happy they are on their journey. This can ultimately perhaps, sorry about that. I thought I had that turned off. Getting really focused on a baseline where you're measuring that customer experience through surveys, and then you're checking in on it to see how you're trending. You've got a baseline, quarter to quarter, month to month, as things roll on. Are you getting better? Or are you getting worse? So surveys, I think, a big piece of it. At Salesforce, we had this thing called Trailhead, which was about enablement. It's kind of free of charge training and so forth. Many of you may have seen it. And it also, within it, provided an area for customers to provide general product feedback above and beyond some surveys. So feedback on product improvements. We also had an area we called Idea Exchange. Within there, you can go check it out yourself. Actually, you go to the Trailhead website. And that was an area to provide feedback on new product capabilities that you coveted or wanted to make a case for that. And I can tell you that Salesforce took that stuff seriously, and that became input into the planning and the product organization. And when we sat down and tried to figure out where our R&D investment was looking at, that was one of the real key data points, because it really was, what can happen, particularly as your business scales, is those top 10 customers can kind of drown out everybody else. And that doesn't necessarily help you win the whole market. So something like this that allows you efficiently to cover the whole market and get a good baseline of understand how you're doing, vitally important. There's advisory boards, there's working groups on specific topics. There's a lot of other things at your disposal.
That's great. So I think we have time for maybe one more quick one, pulling out of both Jeff's comments and something that Renee brought up. I think a lot of what comes out of those programs or conversations is a ton of feedback and a ton of points that either customer success or sales is bringing to product teams and talking about internally. How do you navigate those waters to make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of what's important, what is actionable, when maybe the interaction between those things might be different for every team and every vantage point? Renee, perhaps you have a perspective.
Yeah, I think that if an organization's doing customer success right, you shouldn't have different points of view, because ultimately you're aligned on both the value that you're bringing to the customer and kind of the company outcomes that you're aiming at. But that's a world that we don't always live in. So if we don't live in that world, it's really just making sure you have good roles and responsibilities and clarity on who owns what pieces and how they kind of move forward on those pieces, and outcomes that are shared across the group. So if you can get shared outcomes and feel like everybody understands where they fit in driving those outcomes, it can help alleviate the different points of view. And then it's just communication and relationships, unfortunately, on some of the levels, right? But shared roles and responsibilities help a lot alleviate those challenges. But that's even a challenge itself, as you kind of have rolling needs and rolling responsibilities. So you don't get to just set it and forget it kind of thing. This is your job, and we don't roll back and look at it. It's that constant iteration of where are things working, where are things not working, where are we seeing friction points, and what's the root cause of those friction points, and how do we make it better in the future?
I think that's great. So thank you both, Jeff, Renee. Incredible to be able to ask some questions of you all. Jeff, thank you for the lovely presentation. Jay should be joining me here in a second to wrap things up, as I know we're coming to the end of the hour. But thank you everyone for participating. We're super excited to kick off the customer success core for the year, virtually as it is. Jay, I'll pass it to you to give us some closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that. Thank you all for joining us while you're barricaded at home. Even in this unique format, we had a lot of great engagement and questions. So you can see there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of things to discuss. So this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we're hoping to do for events to foster that discussion throughout the year. So again, thank you for joining. Please follow _VC on Twitter. That's the handle. We'll connect you with the slides. I know there are a couple of folks that asked for that, as well as keep you in the loop for future events. So follow us along there. Thank you for coming. Stay safe out there and have a great night.
Stay sane as well.